Since I have only 15 minutes to discuss a topic that I could discuss with you for many more hours, I am not going to attempt to sugar the pill. I'm going to get straight to the point. I would like to begin by quoting Professor Anton Haber. There are two areas where we have failed miserably. The one is health, the other is education. Universities are churning out graduates like a sausage machine, and they can't read and they can't write. We can blame the present demise of literacy in education on a number of factors. These include the diversity of the student population, oversubscribed courses, lack of teaching capacity, pressure to complete content curricula, a tacit but non-specialist knowledge of subject discourses and how to teach them, and administrative issues related to funding, venues, tutorial staff, and timetables. Nevertheless, reading and writing are central components of the academic process. On the one hand, all students need to read a range of texts as part of their studies, and on the other hand, the hallmark of success for most students at university is mastery of academic writing. Now, it's generally assumed that students exit 12 years of schooling being able to read and write effectively, but we all know that this is generally not the case. Comparatively few South African children are exposed to early reading experiences and fail to get equipped with what Cummins refers to as cognitive academic language proficiency. As a result, many enter university with low levels of language maturity, limited reading interests, and poor reading comprehension. It follows that students who cannot read fluently and do not understand what they read cannot learn from texts. Language is central to the way students structure and organize knowledge. It is also central, in the Vygotskian sense, to the way they develop higher mental functions. Without a prerequisite knowledge of the textual world, students remain non-participating members of a knowledge society. Now, research suggests that student attitudes to literacy and learning in formal settings can often be linked to their early literacy experiences. Shirley Bryce Heath, the author of Ways with Words, which many of you may have read, maintains that children who are socialized into a print world from an early age have the advantage of what she describes as a deep continuity between patterns of socialization and language learning in the home culture and what goes on in school. In her investigation of literacy practices across different communities in the United States, he found that middle-class parents tended to provide their children through modeling and instruction ways of using language and of appropriating knowledge from texts that prepares them for formal schooling. This link is interestingly established in the following extract from a student's literacy narrative as she reflects on her early experiences with texts. I grew up loving to read, whether it was comics, novels, newspapers, fiction or non-fiction, or even road signs. Reading took up a lot of my time in my primary school years. I think it all started with those bedtime stories my mom used to read to me once in a while. Looking back now, I realize I loved the fantasy world, and in fact I still do. To actually escape the life one lives right now and feel other people's emotions, experiences, joys, pains and fears is just so intriguing. Now, this description is a sharp contrast with experiences of many of our students who have limited or no reading resources either at home or at school, and where there is little opportunity to be enculturated into the literate practices of written texts. The following is an account that probably represents the schooling experience of a large number of our present students. I grew up in a remote village in a disadvantaged community in Limpopo, north of Polokwane. We had no libraries in the community nor in school. Children were only introduced to writing and reading on the board. The teacher would be the only person who read the prescribed books in class. Research further indicates that negative attitudes in reading, inculcated early in schooling, tend to remain stable from childhood through to adulthood. Asked to evaluate one of our first reading courses at UJ, a student had this to say: "I still hate reading, and I hated this term's work because the reading was too long and we boys don't enjoy reading. The text had too much serious stuff." One consequence of recognizing different student life experiences and literacy is that it focuses our attention on ways in which school literacy may in fact be in conflict with home or community literacy. When there is a mismatch, as there often is, it can be very difficult to implement pedagogical approaches that students perceive as being what Jackson refers to as an imposed artifact of an alien culture. Individuals are enculturated into different social practices which reflect different world views. The following student's narration of his early literacy experiences highlights the different value placed on literacy practices in different communities. I grew up in a family that believes in cattle raising and planting food. By the time I was 4 years old, I had never had a book, and I never tried to hold a book in my hands. My society was lacking in literacy. People used to see you as a serious person while you are carrying a school bag, because lots of people did not go to school in my society. But if you were to tell them about cattle raising and planting crops, there you were a man by talking about those two things. Sadly, this very student dropped out of his course at the end of the first term. May have been for a number of different reasons, but very possibly feeling very alienated in an environment that in no way reflected his home or community environment. These student narratives provide us with very important insight into students' early literacy practices. They highlight the very difficult transitions students have to make from what often is an orally interactive context to the more abstract ones of written communication. We need to remember that students entering a new discourse are not only encountering new texts, but exploring new identities and new ways of thinking and understanding. As I see it, we have one of two options. We can continue paying lip service to academic literacy and relegating it to the lowest priority in the curriculum. Or we can recognize it as a central component in student academic success and introduce innovative literacy programs that support student learning. Literacy remains the gatekeeper to higher education, one way or the other. Unless we find ways to narrow the gap between student literacy practices and the expectations of the academy, I fear we will continue to graduate students who can neither read nor write.